Okay, so in testing video part 2, we're going to talk about the fourth of the testing technologies that we're going to learn about in this module, and that is espresso. Now, espresso is a user interface testing framework. You do have to run it instrumented. So when we're taking a look at our folders or testing folders, it needs to go in this Android test folder. And espresso is really, really good at doing end-to-end UI tests. One of the things that is cool about it is that it evaluates your app from the UI level by selecting items, buttons, text views, spinners, checkboxes, whatever, interacts with them like a user would, and then checks the output from the standpoint of the user interface. So that makes them really, really good for end-to-end scenario testing, where you can say like, okay, well, I want to make sure that my app does this one scenario from the user's perspective, end-to-end, really, really great. And this is a great use for espresso. Now, because it's an instrumented test, it means that you do have to have an Android device, and either an emulator or an actual physical device, up and running for the test to run on. Also, because it's a UI test, it means that it takes longer to run. It means it can be these UI tests tend to be flakier. That means that they will sometimes give correct values in passing tests, and sometimes fail, and even when you haven't made any changes to the code, and they just tend to take a long time to run, and they're hard to debug. That's the other item to keep in mind about UI tests. They tend to take a long time to run. So generally speaking, when you're writing your tests, you're going to want the gross majority of your tests to be unit tests, and you're going to have like a handful of end-to-end UI tests that are going to verify that the main user flows and scenarios in your app work correctly. So we're going to create a single end-to-end test, UI test. We're going to call it tip app UI test. I'm going to click OK. And we're going to use espresso for this. Now, the thing with espresso is that espresso has a lot of imports. And as a matter of fact, espresso uses JUnit like works hand in glove with JUnit, kind of like Roboelectric and Makito, except that there's a whole bunch of matchers and selectors that are unique only to espresso. And really the only thing you're going to use from JUnit is going to be some of the annotations. So let me show you what I mean. So first what we're going to do is @run with, and for our @run with, for our @run with, we're going to use Android JUnit 4.class. And then we're going to declare it as a @large test. This really just tells Android Studio, hey, this test might take a while. If it seems unresponsive, it's not because it's really unresponsive. It's a UI test. It's a quote large test. Now, one of the things that that espresso uses for testing is what's called a test rule, and this is a JUnit entity. But basically, it'll create this test context for the tests to run with. It allows you to create an instance of the class under test, and then you don't actually have to specifically call specific methods on that item. You'll just be able to use built-in methods to select UI items in that class. That's kind of a mouthful and probably doesn't make sense to you right now, but it'll make sense once I start showing you some of the code. So we're going to call activity test rule. Type is main activity. We're going to import it. And then we're going to call it, let's go ahead with that, activity rule equals new activity test rule. And we're going to pass in class. So basically we're saying like, hey, create a new activity test rule, and that's going to contain our main activity, and we're going to pass in an instance of our main activity.class as part of that. And then now we're going to create our actual UI test. So we're going to do at test public void test food service good tip generation. So there's a lot of code here, and rather than boring you to tears as I tap it all out, we're just going to copy and paste it. And you also notice that there's a lot of things we need to import. Imports, particularly with Espresso, are really, really tricky. You can accidentally import the wrong version of Espresso into your test and find yourself in trouble. If you do find yourself in trouble, take a look at the how-to that I posted to GitHub, and it has a couple of debugging and troubleshooting tips that you can use. But rather than getting ourselves into trouble, I'm just going to copy and paste all my imports. So we're going to just go do that right there. So now let's take a look at the code. With Espresso, what you need to do is you need to create a sequence of UI steps. And these UI steps are going to be basically in the UI, I want you to find this UI element. And then once you find this UI element, I want you to do this action on it. In this case, so we're going to say on view, so that's a selector, and we're going to say on view, we want you to select the view in our activity, in our context of our activity, that has the ID text box underscore service dot underscore amount. So this right here. And then once you find this text box, we want you to perform this action. In this case, type some text. And then similarly, we want you to find the view in our activity that is a spinner that has ID spinner service type, SPNs, SVC type. Perform a click item on it. Spinners require two separate steps. So first you need to click the spinner, and then you have to select an item in the spinner. So you notice that here we then have the selector on data, which is so on data being shown, and all of it is string. We want you to find the one that is food server, and then we want you to click it. Kind of a lot going on here. This is one of those things that you'll probably end up looking up a lot. I know I did. And then same thing with spinner. So on the view, select the spinner of this ID, perform a click on it. When the data is shown, pick this specific data value, then perform a click. Select the button, click that button, and now what you're going to do is you're going to check that the view with this ID has this value. So here's where you're actually going to do the assert, where you're going to check that an expected value matches the actual value. So let's go ahead and see what this looks like. And because, like I said, this has been a test, we're actually going to watch the test do its thing right here on our emulator. And we're going to select our emulator, start running, and then it passes. And that's an Espresso test. So these are really hard to troubleshoot, If you run into any troubles in the homework with the espresso test, please do not hesitate to reach out to me, because it took me some while to debug just these simple tests that I'm demonstrating to you for this video. And yeah, I will see you in class.